Hello there. You're listening to the very first episode ever of the Psych Everywhere podcast. Today we've got a really great speaker to get things started, Dr. Antonio Puente. Did you know in 2005, the American Psychological Association, it stated that 1 in 5 Americans identifies as Hispanic. And yet, only 1% of psychologists identified themselves as Hispanic. Welcome to the very first episode of the Psych Everywhere podcast. To kick off the show, we're starting with a series of episodes, all centered around the theme of diverse voices in psychology. Hi, I'm Bradley Cannon from the Psi Chi Central Office in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Antonio Puente about the rising need for resources to support the Hispanic Latino community. So, let's hear what he has to say. The first question that I had for Dr. Puente is why should Hispanics and Latinos, specifically, have more access to mental health resources?
Well, first of all, great opportunity to be with you today, and look forward to sharing some ideas with folks that have access to this information. Your question was about Hispanics and mental health. Let's tackle the first part, Hispanics in general. Well, Hispanics are probably one of the fastest growing ethnic minority groups in the United States, the largest ethnic minority group in the United States, and by the year 2050 or thereabouts, will be the largest group in the United States. Mm-hmm. So to start off with, very simply, it's just obviously important that we need to attend to this large and ever-growing group. As far as the second part of the question, you mentioned the phrase mental health. I actually, more recent years, changed the word to include behavioral. Okay. So instead of mental, I'm now thinking about behavioral health. And even more recently, I sort of began to drop the word behavioral and think about health. And the reason for that is because psychology should be ever present in every aspect of healthcare. I know historically we've been there, in mental health that is, and more recently we've sort of pushed boundaries with things like neuropsychology and so forth to what we might call behavioral cognitive health. But we should really be present in all aspects of healthcare, whether it's diabetes or pain control or dementia or depression. We should be present in everything that we do in healthcare. So, if healthcare is approximately 18% of the gross domestic product and growing, if Hispanics represent about 18% of the demographics and growing, it seems to me that we should be attending to this unusual, if you will, tsunami. Mm-hmm. Having said that, one of the challenges that we find ourselves is that the personnel and the science that support that tsunami is just not there. For example, let's take neuropsychology, which happens to be my area of expertise. There are about 5,000 neuropsychologists. About 100 of those are part of the Hispanic Neuropsychological Society. Maybe about 50 or so speak Spanish fluently, and about 5 of them do research. Are you kidding me? For 18% of our nation? And now, that's of course our nation. If we go outside the U.S., that's a different story. We're having to deal with, a little less than 7 billion people, and we have 100 of us in the U.S. So there's a big, big gap between what is needed and what is there.
So just to sort of clarify, exactly what kind of health resources are we talking about?
Well, in terms of health resources, we can start out with, as I said earlier, personnel. Mm-hmm. We need to have people who are bilingual and bicultural. Second of all, we have to have psychological knowledge. We have, for example, and products for that matter, there are about 5,000 psychological tests. 500 are translated in Spanish, and about 25 are usable and relative to meeting the standards for educational psychological tests, a set of standards that APA and related groups put out. So we don't have the product. In other words, it's just not there. And of course, everything involving specific diagnostic and treatment guidelines, strategies, instruments that would allow to access this population. Because otherwise, we make errors. Let me give you a little example. Taking the Wisconsin card sorting test, it turns out that many of us are not so comfortable in following the rules of that test because they're just not something we think about the way that the test is structured. Or the Wechsler Intelligence Scale. It appears that approximately 1 standard deviation, or 15 points lower, is found in many individuals who are of Hispanic origin. Well, does that mean that we're more, quote, retarded than individuals who are not? No, it just means that when you ask the questions, what are the colors of the U.S. flag, and you're not from the U.S., it's just not so simple. Or how many miles from New York to Paris? Well, where is Paris? When we're used to where's Mexico City. So we need people, we need resources, and we need science.
So in addition to the language issue, are there any ways that these resources need to be unique to address this population?
Well, you've used the word language, and the standards of educational psychological tests that we put out in 2014, which I was part of, we added the word cultural. Every time there was linguistic, we added cultural, because we now know that both linguistic variables are important and cultural variables are important. For example, one thing is to translate the word, and things are not so equal. Let me give you an example. We use in neuropsychology to determine the ability to understand language. We use a test. How many times or how many words can you give us in 60 seconds? Start out with the letter F. Well, F is found this frequent in the English language and much less frequent in the Spanish language. So the tests are not equivalent. The other thing is, what about norms? We need to have norms that reflect a particular group of individuals. Otherwise, what you end up is getting error. Error in diagnosis, error in understanding, and error in the intervention that you're supposed to provide the individual.
Real quick, let me tell you a little about Dr. Puente, who is a professor of psychology at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. He was also elected 2017 president of the American Psychological Association. Born in La Habana, Cuba, Dr. Puente received his undergraduate degree in psychology from the University of Florida and his master's degree and PhD from the University of Georgia. He's lectured in more than a dozen foreign countries and holds appointments as a visiting professor at the Universidad de Granada, which is in Spain, and the University of California, Los Angeles. Dr. Puente founded and edited the journals Neuropsychology Review and the Journal of Interprofessional Education and Practice, as well as a book series that's 33 books in total in neuropsychology. He is the author of 8 books, 79 book chapters, and 106 journal articles in English, Spanish, and Russian. In addition to activities at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, Dr. Puente maintains a private practice in clinical neuropsychology, ranging from clinical to forensic assessments. Today, Dr. Puente and I are sitting in a sort of quiet room at the 2019 Convention for the Society for Cross-Cultural Research, that's SCCR, which is in Jacksonville, Florida. Each of the next few episodes of this podcast will take place with various esteemed speakers here at this convention. So, let's continue with the interview. Dr. Puente, how did you become interested in this area of research?
Well, as I've mentioned in public talks before, sometimes it's research rather than research, and it's all about understanding who you are and how you fit in this world, finding value to you and making that value move forward. And it all started here in Jacksonville, Florida, where we're recording this at the Society for Cross-Cultural Research. It started when I came here as a young person from Cuba, and I realized that I did not know English. I did not know the culture. For example, in recess, boys were tackling each other after running with an oblong ball. I just came home and said to my mom, I don't understand this. They're actually hitting each other. So what's the purpose of this? So it became a search, if you will, to get a better understanding of what's going on. I began by going to community college and subsequently University of Florida and finally Georgia, where common to all those, how is it that I fit in? How is it that I learned to fit in? And what does that mean in the grander scheme of things? Since graduate school, I've dedicated my life to understanding that process and specifically the role of the brain in that process. And making sure, as I said earlier, that we don't confuse measurement error or diagnostic error with what you're supposed to be understanding and doing something about.
Do you feel that your background has given you a unique perspective on the issue?
Well, obviously, anybody's background gives you a perspective. Whether it's Sigmund Freud, who wrote to his wife Martha, as a young man, I wanted to understand the riddles of life, and here I am trying to find that answers much later. I think your background shapes who you are, and certainly in my case, it has been very critical. I think early on, being bilingual, bicultural, was very problematic. You get low scores on tests. You don't understand how to negotiate complex social situations. But over time, it has turned out to be beyond valuable. And we now even know that having this background gives you an opportunity to even ward off dementia. So, all kinds of fascinating things. Tough beginning, good ending.
So, who are some of your mentors, and what's been the value in those mentorships for you?
Sure. Well, here in Jacksonville, Florida, at the community college, I was very fortunate to just literally walk into psychology class. Dan Atwood, who was there to listen and to tell me that it was good to question self and to question the world. And then when I went to University of Florida, I was fortunate to learn the concept of research with Don Dewsbury, a student of Carl Lashley, who encouraged me to do animal behavioral research. At grad school, my mentor, Lee Peacock, I don't think understood who I was, or for the matter what I was doing, but understood the value of letting someone go do their own thing, and I'm indebted to him. However, if there is a person I consider my mentor, at least intellectually, and maybe in some way professionally, was Roger Sperry, who's the first psychologist to win a Nobel Prize. He discovered the two sides of the brain, and subsequent to that, he wrote a great deal about the importance of brain and values. So, very important individuals in each place in my career, but if there was someone I would consider my mentor, I would consider Sperry. Now, maybe a question would be, why Sperry? Mm-hmm. Well, there's two reasons. I'll give you the personal one, and I'll give you the if you will, theoretical one. Personal one, here's a guy that was always driven to understand, and curiosity was the core of who he was. I could value that. That means a lot to me. Second of all, he had to overcome adversity, and that also is important to me. Around 1950, his wife at the time left him. He contracted tuberculosis, and the University of Chicago did not tenure him. 30 years later, he won the Nobel Prize.
Wow.
How do you go from not having anything to having everything in 3 decades. As far as ideas, he was a great neuroscientist, neuropsychologist, neurophilosopher. He excelled in many areas, not just psychology, and his ideas were socially valuable, academically intriguing, and extremely well done. So in many ways, he reflects a comprehensive template of how to approach one's thinking, not just being narrow, making sure that what you're doing has some impact for the rest of the world.
So what courses or experiences should students seek who are interested in pursuing a career to provide or research health resources?
Well, I think when students are considering a course, I think they might make 2 mistakes. Mistake is, does it fit with my schedule? And is he or she, are they kind of an easy professor? Do they have term papers? Because I really don't want to do those things. And maybe another problem is that they don't understand that you don't get into graduate school by just having good grades. So, first of all, don't just take a slot, take a course. And 2, don't take a course, take a professor. And 3, the professor is not enough. It's what they can teach you outside the classroom, in their clinic, in their laboratory, in their offices, that really make the education of a student come to life. So it's critical that they go down that road. I also would encourage people to find someone that could match who they are as a human being, but who they want to be as a scientist, as a professional, because they could be the first of many to begin to help you walk that path.
Okay. So I thought I'd specifically hone in on different groups and how they can kind of sort of become involved. So specifically for like instructors in classrooms, what can they do to better support Hispanics and Latinos?
Well, for starters, I wish we could have more individuals who were Hispanics to mentor. But just because you're not Hispanic, whether you're African American, Native American, Asian, or for that matter, Caucasian, person from the United States, that doesn't mean you can't be there. I think sometimes we need to roll the dice a little bit and be willing to encourage students that may not have what appears to be the necessary skills. Maybe they don't have the great GPA, or for that matter, great SAT or GRE, but maybe there's a sparkle in their eye, or maybe they can fill a niche that hasn't historically been attended to. So we have very few Hispanic serving institutions, but we certainly have a lot of Hispanic students, and we're going to have more as time goes on. So look out for that bright star, maybe the one that doesn't have everything in the package, and see whether there's some way you can begin to encourage them, even if it's just the small steps. I remember even in high school, a professor, a teacher telling me, "You write well." Well, I didn't know that was true. English was not my native language, and after 8 books, 100 articles, and 80 chapters or something, I really thanked Mr. Smith for saying to me, you can do it, because sometimes all you need is a tiny comment like that to give you the confidence to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything unique for, say, employees or even leaders in companies outside of what they would consider to be the field of psychology? Anything they can do to help Hispanics? Anything unique?
One thing they can do, especially outside psychology, is provide jobs for these individuals. There are a lot of customers that need to be attended to and served that don't speak English, or alternatively, that their culture is different. So provide support in that way. For others, provide internships, provide research opportunities, encourage summer practica, things of that nature, anything that can allow the real world experience. The classroom is obviously an important step, maybe the most important step, but there's so much more to learning that occurs outside the classroom.
So I looked through your CV and I saw Psi Chi pretty far up, pretty early on in your career. So I wondered, could you tell me a little about your Psi Chi experience?
Sure. Well, first of all, I joined Psi Chi when I was a student at the University of Florida. That was an important accomplishment for me, simply because it was the first time that I began to socialize with other people of like-mindedness who believed that they were critical to their career, to have a fellowship of people that were moving forward in psychology. In college, I was very involved. In graduate school, I was very involved with Psi Chi, and we actually used that as a platform to have to develop I guess we could call it a small mini convention for students to present paper, and to have someone from the outside. And we had someone, Frank Beach from Carl Lashley's laboratory, came and spoke to us, and he spent time with me and other Psi Chi leaders, and that was really important. When I went to work at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, which is my second job, actually, if you will, my third job, after my PhD in 1981, there was a Psi Chi group that was starting to emerge. I helped found that chapter, and they eventually became its supervisor and teacher advisor, and continued that for about a decade. And we have a very active Psi Chi chapter and continue doing some things to support it. Just recently, and a great surprise to me, I was asked by the Psi Chi Board of Directors to be willing to be considered to be a distinguished member, which was one of those things you never imagine when you're a student sitting there thinking, how can I be part of a group that one day you'll be honored by them. So a long history of involvement with Psi Chi, and a recent history of being acknowledged by them, which is a great surprise and unbelievable honor.
Okay, awesome. So, as you know, Psi Chi chapters often conduct community service events. So do you have any project ideas or suggestions for them, or any group, student or otherwise, that they could do to better serve the Hispanic Latino community?
Well, I think, first of all, they could serve the community in general by just being good students and being part of a lab, being part of a clinic, volunteering. That's always important. As far as this particular group, I would encourage them to reach out. Many communities have small venues where you have individuals seeking assistance with immigration and so forth, providing resources, even books, English classes, or alternatively, rides, anything would be most welcome. I also think that many of us, when we think about psychology, we think of mental health. And again, I'm going to go back to that. Don't just think of mental health, think of behavioral health, and think of health in general. So they don't necessarily have to be doing mental health to help this community. Whatever they can do, I think, would just go a long ways. It's underserved, underrepresented, and very, very quiet voice in the political process. I think it would be outstanding to be able to attend to them.
Okay. Since we're here at SCCR, the Society for Cross-Cultural Research, I was wondering if you might also answer, since we're here, what is the value of cross-cultural research specifically?
Well, of course, for me, that's what I do. I do cultural neuropsychology. I think, first of all, a psychology that is basically based on sophomore, white, Anglo-Saxon individuals, primarily female these days, a psychology is destined to just simply not be generalizable. We now know, for example, that such things as when children begin to walk and talk, it's highly influenced by the culture you live in. We know that whether you have a high IQ or low IQ partially depends on the exposure that you've had to a culture and the type of tests that you've received. So we need to, make sure that we have a psychology that's universally applicable. That's very fundamental. Otherwise, just have something that's valued for a particular region of the country, which in itself is not so bad. But then let's not call it psychology. Let's call it psychology for Floridians, for example. The other thing is that we have to be careful not to engage in error of understanding and measurement. We cannot be giving false diagnoses to individuals. And finally, I think we need to value the wonderful robustness that comes from diversity. We all know that in genetics, when a species breeds within itself, it ends up having problems. Diversity is the foundation for not only this country, but for our biology in general, genetics. So we need to endorse that. The beauty of diversity, instead of seeing it as a problem or as an add-on, where you think of it as a core, as beautiful, and reflective of the richness that reflects who we are.
Okay, those are some really great answers. I had one other question. Did you want to talk about any ways that the recent media focus on immigration might be affecting Hispanics and others?
Yes. I think the recent focus on immigration, especially the focus is receiving, challenges what I've said so far in our interview, including the richness and beauty of diversity. It encourages staleness and narrowness of vision and does not reflect who we are as a country and who we are as people in general, whether you're American or otherwise. I think the other thing that's really difficult is that it's causing, and I see this because we run a free clinic for indigents on Wednesday nights where I live, it's causing people to be extremely anxious, very depressed, and very concerned. Why did I come to this country? I have a cousin, in fact I'll mention her by first name, Christy in Chicago, that said to me recently, I walked through the desert of Mexico, and I crossed the border, and as Cubans at that time you could have, I suffered for this. If I'm going to have a country that does not value who I am, I wonder why I came. And that's not the attitude that people who are coming should have. They should not be concerned. They should not be worried. They should be welcome, and they should be enthusiastic about the beauty that this country brings to the table for the rest of the world. So this is not a good time for immigrants. It's not a good time for the core of our country. But it is an exciting time to begin to ask those questions. Who are we as Americans? And what can psychology do to preserve the value of people?
Okay. Is there anything at all else that you'd like to add?
One of the things we didn't have a chance to talk about, Bradley, but I want to emphasize is the fact that anybody can do it. What do you mean, anybody, and do what? Well, let me give it to you in a simple fashion. When I was a student, like the individuals may be listening here, I was going to a community college that was based in a recently renovated, segregated grammar school, having no resources and no idea what I was going to do. A few years later, I became the first president of the American Psychological Association from Latin America, the first native Spanish speaker. So if you can go from a recently desegregated grammar school to becoming president of the American Psychological Association, I guess you could say, simply put, if I did it, you can too.
I can't thank Dr. Puente enough for taking the time out of his busy day to speak with me here at SCCR. Listeners, if you'd like to learn more about this podcast, please visit the publication/news tab located on the Psi Chi website. That's www.psichi.org. Also, be sure to visit our podcast on iTunes and leave a review for each episode. I'm excited to see what you think about the interviews, and who knows, from time to time, maybe I'll read a few of the reviews on this podcast too. So, what is Psi Chi? In case you aren't familiar, Psi Chi is the International Honor Society in Psychology, which welcomes undergraduates, graduate students, and faculty at approximately 1,150 university or college campuses. These schools are located across the United States and 15 other countries. Psi Chi's mission is recognizing and promoting excellence in the science and application of psychology. And so to do this, we offer our members a total of $400,000 in annual awards, grants, and scholarships. We share psychology-related job opportunities on our Career Center. We provide opportunities to become involved in and publish psychology-related research. And of course, we also release a lot of great educational content through our magazine, our blog, and the brand new podcast that you're listening to right now. Okay, I want to end off by thanking you for tuning in to the pilot episode of Psych Everywhere. It's been a privilege getting to speak with you today and to host this historic episode of what I hope will be a long-lasting and informative publication. In addition to speaking with Dr. Puente today, I will also be having several other interview chats while I'm here at SCCR. So, in the next few episodes, we've got some really interesting and prolific voices coming your way. Specifically, next up, look forward to hearing from Dr. Ani Kalajian about conducting humanitarian missions in locations following devastating natural and human-made disasters. And in that one, Annie is going to read us a really heartfelt poem too that she wrote about being a Syrian refugee. After that, we'll speak with Kelly Kikola about Psi Chi's Network for International Collaborative Exchange and its first crowd research project. And yeah, I know that's a mouthful, but don't worry, Kelly is going to explain it to you and how you can get involved in this unique research opportunity. Finally, we have a very special interview with not one but 4 experts on the little-known facts about human trafficking. That conversation, and it's gut-wrenching, but it's also got a lot of hope for a brighter future, that one will be with Doctors Nancy M. Seiden, Yvette G. Flores, Irma Barron, and Jill Bloom. Okay, thank you again for listening to our first podcast episode. That's all for now. I'll talk to you again soon. Copyright 2019, Psi Chi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. All rights reserved.